there. And Mr. Truman, if you will give me a prompt at the proper time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You wish for me to proceed with both instructions?
No, sir.
Go right ahead.
You are Robert Hinman.
Yes, sir, I am.
Tell us your background in education and employment, please.
My name's Robert Hinman, and it's probably best if I go chronologically from my first professional job to present to help keep things in order. I joined the United States Marine Corps in 1989 and got discharged in 1993 off of active duty, and joined the Beckley Police Department here in Beckley as a law enforcement officer. I worked at the Beckley Police Department 4.5 years and applied for the West Virginia State Police, and then was hired by the West Virginia State Police in 1997. I stayed with the State Police until the year 2000. I left law enforcement and went into doing private investigation for about a year for a local attorney here in Beckley. In 2001, I went back into law enforcement, worked at the Bluefield Police Department for 2 years. I was doing that while I was finishing an undergraduate degree at Bluefield State College. Finished that in 2003, went back into the private sector, came back to Beckley, worked for a law firm here doing civil investigation. I did that for about 3 years, and I was then recruited by a former law enforcement officer that I worked with, who was now working with the West Virginia State Insurance Commission's fraud unit. It was a new unit that had been created in West Virginia around 2015, 2016. So I joined that unit and did insurance fraud investigation for about 6 years until the state police had called me and then recruited me to come back to the state police because they wanted to stand up a financial crimes unit inside their Bureau of Criminal Investigation. They didn't have anybody doing that. They needed someone with some experience doing fraud investigations, so I went to the state police in 2013 and stayed there till 2019. In 2019, I applied for law school here in West Virginia and went to move to Morgantown, attended law school starting in 2019. Law school is 3 years long, so I did that for 3 years. And then after law school, I took the bar in 2023. Was accepted to the state bar. I'm now a practicing attorney in Morgantown, West Virginia. I opened an office there, and I'm in my second year in private practice in Morgantown. And that's my storied career, part of it.
Was this case your last case in law enforcement?
This was the last criminal investigative case that I worked before I left the law enforcement community.
Your Honor, I ask that this be marked as States 1 for identification. Your Honor, I believe it would be appropriate to read the 2 cautionary instructions at this time.
All right, members of the jury, normally the court would read to you what's called the jury charge at the end of all the evidence and before the closing arguments. Sometimes during the trial, the court must read to you a limiting or cautionary instruction, and that time has arisen. So I read to you these two instructions. The court instructs the jury that evidence of other crimes, wrongs, or acts by the accused is not to be considered to prove her character in order to show that she acted in conformity therewith. However, the jury may consider such evidence for other purposes, such as proof of motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, identity, and absence of mistake or accident as to the crimes charged. The court has or will take judicial notice of court documents generated by the United States District Court, Southern District of West Virginia. That is, the court has or will take as a fact that the litigation in the United States District Court, Southern District of West Virginia, occurred based upon the determination of sources whose accuracy cannot reasonably be questioned. You are instructed, however, that you may or may not accept that fact as conclusive. All right, you may continue now, Mr. True.
Your Honor, before we begin, the defense counsel will be shown the exhibit so we are on the same page.
Sure.
Show it to Matthew. We can see both. Bob, I hand you what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 1. Can you review and identify, please?
Yes, sir. These would be the federal documents. The financial crime in this case was charged through the federal government. So these are the federal documents that certify that an agreement was made by Ms. Cochran to plead to certain financial crimes, federal financial crimes, to resolve the financial crime that occurred with this investigation.
This was your last criminal investigation, correct?
Yes, sir.
And State's Exhibit 1 reflects the finality of that investigation for that part of the case. Is that a fair assessment?
It does.
Tell us some background as to what that case was about. What's a Ponzi scheme?
Let me start by saying that I just didn't go from law enforcement into doing financial crimes.
I'm sorry, I'm going to object. We don't need all the background. Let's just answer the questions.
All right, I'll give the witness some leeway. Sir, you can explain. Go ahead.
I have training in financial crimes. I'm a certified fraud examiner through the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. I have a master's in forensic accounting. During the course of that education and training, couched with the experience of conducting financial crimes over that 13-year period with the state police and with the Insurance Commission's fraud unit, as well as some other financial crimes that I worked during my uniform law enforcement days. I come to learn about the different various types of fraud and financial crimes that occur in society. So when I say fraud or I say financial crime, or I would say maybe a scam, I may use some terminology that's more or less synonymous as I discuss this. So if you hear me say fraud or scheme or scam, I'm generally talking about the same thing. The financial crime aspect of that term would apply to the violation of law or the criminal charge. So when we say a Ponzi scheme, we're talking about a type of fraud. And what a Ponzi scheme is, the term Ponzi is a name coined after a con man in the 1920s. So Ponzi itself means nothing, but the Ponzi scheme is a methodology of fraud. And what that is it's an illegal business practice where someone would induce a person or a victim to invest money into a business, and then they would continue to get investors to invest money in the business, but later investors' money would be paid to earlier investors' money, and then that cycle would just continue over and over. So as new investors would invest in the business, then monies from that investor would be used to pay earlier investors. Now, the investment could be a number of things, but that basically is what a Ponzi scheme is, taking new investor money and paying earlier investors on money that they were supposed to receive from their earlier investment.
What do you look for when you suspect a Ponzi scheme?
Ponzi schemes are generally involving in business. So when you're looking for certain red flags that may, with many scams and schemes and frauds with the Ponzi scheme, if the investment opportunity, the very first indicator is that it sounds too good to be true. When that sounds too good to be true, that's typically the initial indicator or red flag. There may be promises that this investment is very low risk. You know, people who want to take their hard-earned money and invest in something to get money back want to make sure that they're not going to lose money. So there's typically a high reward with a low risk involved with inviting or inducing someone to invest in a company or a business. And then there's opportunities to reinvest that money. You know, if you've earned this money, and there's opportunities to reinvest. So there's different red flags, and they're not all, the indicators aren't always present in all scams or schemes, but those are some of the ones with the Ponzi scheme.
In this particular case, how did you become aware that there was an investigation to be opened?
This investigation opened from a businessman here in Beckley who was who was part of this overall financial
Your Honor, I'm sorry.
crime or scheme.
I'm going to object. Can we approach the bench on this one?
Sure.
Thank you, Your Honor. You can go ahead and answer the question. How did you open this case?
A local businessman who was involved with Ms. Cochran's business called a state trooper or ran into a state trooper that he knew who and asked he was having problems with.
Now I'm going to object to hearsay, John.
This is Dane. I think we need to cut to the chase.
Okay. You opened an investigation.
Yes.
And you determined that the defendant was, in fact, operating a Ponzi scheme.
Yes. The defendant had a business and was operating a Ponzi scheme.
In summary fashion, what was the overview of the business that she pretended to have?
The business purported to be a supplier of durable goods and other materials to government contracts. So the federal government would need to buy supplies or goods. They would put out an announcement for businesses to bid on these contracts to fulfill their needs. And then federal contractors, businesses would bid on these contracts, get awarded the contract, then the business should supply the good to the government and get paid for the good they provided. That was the purpose of the business. That's what the business purported to be.
And you did an extensive investigation that culminated in the federal conviction that you have in State's Exhibit 1, correct?
Yes.
Now, the defense has floated the theory that Michael Cochran was up to his eyeballs in this Ponzi scheme. From your investigation, do you have any evidence that would support that?
Let me state by saying the business itself, in its appearance, in its existence, was legitimate. The business was legitimately set up. It was registered with the state of West Virginia. It was registered with the federal government. So Michael Cochran was aware of the business, and because he participated with what he believed was a legitimate business.
I'm going to object, Judge, as to what Mr. Cochran may have believed. That calls for speculation.
You can continue, please.
So during our investigation, we reviewed many financial records, many documents to determine if any government contracts existed, any federal government contracts had been awarded to this business, and we could not find any contracts whatsoever where the government had awarded these. Now there was one state of West Virginia contract that was that Mr. Cochran had, or the business had bid on, but they never fulfilled that contract. So beyond this one contract, there were never any contracts that we could find to support what the business purported to do. Also, in reviewing these documents, there were applications made to financial institutions, and many of those documents only bore the name of Mrs. Cochran in the business, and those documents would purport that she was a 100% owner of the business. So there was a suggestion or indication that Mr. Cochran didn't know about certain documents that because he wasn't listed on certain documents. In addition to that, the victim investors of this financial crime were given reasons. They were given information to induce their investment. They were given information regarding them getting their investment money returned to them, the money they should have earned on their investment. So the information that was false or deceptive that was being given to victim investors of the business was the exact same information that was being given to Mr. Cochran when he would question why the business hadn't received its money from the contracts. He did participate in looking for contracts for the business to bid on, but that was about the extent of his involvement. He would search the internet and the federal websites to identify federal contracts that the business could bid on. But the structure was that Mrs. Cochran would go out and secure those contracts from the government. So as far as Mr. Cochran knew, based on the records that we reviewed, the interviews that we did, he believed that they had obtained contracts and that they would be receiving money for these contracts. So he would ask the same questions that investors would ask: where's the money for this contract? And so that would indicate that he was not involved, because he's asking the same questions regarding monies and profits.
In your investigation, what do you base the fact that he was asking the same questions as the investigators? What do you base the conclusion that he was asking the same questions as the investors?
During our investigation, like we reviewed many records, we consulted many agencies, we obtained records through subpoenas or search warrants, and we were able to get text message communication held by investors, and also as a result of some subpoenas and search warrants, we were able to...
I'm going to object to any third-party involvement in this and what the other parties have done. We have not been provided with that evidence, and the witness is testifying about something that is absolute hearsay.
Sustained.
You executed some search warrants and subpoenas for cell phone records, correct?
That's correct.
Did that include the defendant and messages back and forth between her and her husband?
That is correct.
Did you use that information to reach any conclusion as to Michael Cochran's knowledge as to what was going on with their reported businesses?
We did.
How did you verify that the conversations by text were actually between the defendant and Michael Cochran? How did you authenticate those documents?
Well, the holder of those records, we would issue a subpoena to AT&T, for example, may hold business or phone records. We would issue legal subpoenas for those to get those records, and then we would review those records.
Well, I mean, how did you know that there were communications between Mr. Cochran and Mrs. Cochran?
Well, Mr. Cochran had an established phone number. Mrs. Cochran had an established cell phone number. So the records that we requested and reviewed were those cell phone records. We also received records from investors, victim investors of the business, and would compare those to the same communication. So we had multiple text message communication, some email communication that we reviewed to come to our conclusions.
Leading right up to the 5th of February 2019, you saw text messages between the defendant and her husband?
Yes.
What was the plan? How did it end up that they were going to fly to Lynchburg, Virginia? From your investigation, how do you know that?
Let me say this scheme began in 2017. So it had gone.
I'm going to object. The witness is not answering the questions.
I think he's trying to explain, and I'll give him leeway in that regard. You may continue, Mr. Hinman.
This Ponzi scheme began in 2017, mid-2017. And as it matured, more investors gave more money. There were other monies that were obtained through some loans that the Ms. Cochran would obtain. But there was still this need to return money back to the investors. The investors were still expecting money to be returned. The problem with the Ponzi scheme is it's short-lived.
Now I'm going to object. This question was asked and answered at least once.
Yeah, I think maybe we are getting a little far afield now. Perhaps another question would be in order, Mr. Truman.
Thank you. Let's just explore one other area. From your investigation, is there a single shred of evidence that supports the defendant's theory that Michael Cochran was going to turn his wife into the federal government?
No, sir, there was not.
That's all the questions the state has at this time. Thank you.
Cross-examination, Mr. Bishop.
Mr. Hinman, I understand that you were involved in every aspect of the federal investigation of Natalie Cochran. Is that right?
I left the state police before the indictment, before she was indicted,
Before the federal indictment.
before the actual indictment occurred. But the information that was obtained to bring that about, yes.
Prior to that, you were involved in every aspect of that investigation.
Yes, sir.
All right. So you wouldn't know what the federal government alleged in the indictment?
No, I do know what they alleged in the indictment.
Well, is it true that the federal government alleged that both Mr. Cochran and Ms. Cochran got involved in a scheme, but Mr. Cochran died, what the federal government called unexpectedly in 2019? So she was the only one who got indicted. Is that true?
I would not characterize it as such.
No.
Did you see the forfeiture documents that the federal government filed against the Cochrans?
Yes, some of those.
Some of those. And in those documents, federal government alleges that they were both involved in the scheme, right?
Without reviewing the documents, I don't know.
All right, we'll come back to this. Who is Colonel Jan Cahill?
Colonel Cahill would be the superintendent of the state police during my last employment with the state police.
I'd like to mark this
All right, if you'll present it to the clerk, please.
as the defendant's exhibit number 1. I have provided a copy to the
Approach briefly,
Yes, you may.
May I approach?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Hinman, I'll hand you what's been marked as defendant's exhibit number 1. Would you tell the jury what that document is?
This is a communication, a letter that I prepared and sent to a federal investigator.
That was done in April of 2019, right?
Yes. It's dated April 2019.
And the subject of your correspondence was the Tactical Solution Group and the Technology Management Solutions. Would you tell us what those two organizations were?
Technology Management Solutions, or also known as TMS, was a West Virginia company formed in 2013 by Michael Cochran and Natalie Cochran.
How about the other one?
Tactical Solutions Group, also referred to as TSG, doing business as TSG, is the company that was formed in 2017 by Natalie Cochran and Michael Cochran, which the Ponzi scheme ran through.
All right. Now, looking at this document, is it true that you allege as the mode of operation that the Cochrans, plural, Cochrans, have been soliciting contract investors to invest funds into their company to be applied to government contracts? Plural. Cochrans.
Which paragraph, Mr. Victor?
Mode of operation, first page.
Yes, I see that.
So they were both involved in the soliciting government contracts, right? According to you.
Well, when this correspondence was written, we began the investigation 1 month prior to this correspondence, so we were still fact-finding. We didn't conclude that Mr. Cochran was or wasn't involved that early. We went into it as if both were involved. We didn't know. We hadn't collected all the evidence, reviewed all the documents and things of that nature. So
Mr. Hinman,
at that time, it still does list them as Cochrans.
Mr. Hinman, this investigation has been going on since 2017. Is that right?
No, sir.
When did you start this investigation, sir?
In 2019.
2019. So 2 months before months or so before the federal indictment?
The indictment wasn't in April.
Okay. So in 2019, you're still speculating whether they're both involved in this or whether just one of them is involved?
By the time the federal indictment occurred, we had concluded that Mr. Cochran did not know. We had spoken with witnesses, we had reviewed documents, we had got all of our records, we had subpoenaed in from third-party record holders.
Yes.
So it would be, no, we were open-minded. We didn't know to what extent either, or if they were, we were still collecting records.
Where is in this document that you are telling Colonel Cahill that this investigation is still in its infancy?
this letter is not addressed to Colonel Cahill, first of all. And I don't understand that really, what your question is.
Well, tell us where in this document, written to Jeff, whoever Jeff is, does it say that this investigation has just started and we're collecting more data and we're going to talk to more witnesses?
The document says, Jeff, pleasure speaking with you this morning. This is a document that I prepared following a phone call with a special agent of the federal government who I had reached out to assist with getting records from federal government databases, and I was providing him the information he had requested so that he could do his search.
But I didn't ask you that, Mr. Hinman. I asked you to show me in this document where it says that we have just started the investigation of the Cochrans, plural. Where is it?
The document would not state that because that's not relevant to this document,
It wasn't relevant. Okay.
to this document, to
I see.
this special agent.
But you described in detail in this letter the mode of the operation of those two organizations, and you used the word Cochrans, plural, and now you also described how this alleged fraud is being perpetrated. Is that right?
This working document does describe some of the information we had learned at that point. Yes.
Then you also wanted to see the list of any contracts or any other documents that deal with the Cochrans. Page 2, what we need. Cochrans, not just Natalie Cochran. Is that right?
Is that a question?
Yeah?
I was trying to explain all this earlier, but
Well,
you
explain it to
objected.
me like I'm 3 years old. Do you have in the what we need section of this document the statement that we need all the documents, date, numbers, dates, details, payments to TSG and or the Cochrans, again plural. Does it say that in your letter or not?
It does.
It does. How about in the mode of operation of this alleged fraud? When, and I'm reading from the top paragraph, 5th line. When maturity date occurs, TSG Cochrans notify investors of funds being in, but then offer them a partial payment. Fair to say that you use the word Cochrans again?
Yes, I use the word Cochran's again, referring to the Cochran's business, TSG and or TMS,
Okay.
Technology Solutions Group, Technology Management Solutions.
You testified that it is your, I guess, conclusion that Mr. Cochran didn't know anything about what Ms. Cochran was doing in terms of the fraud and the Ponzi scheme, right?
That's not accurate, no.
Okay. What did Mr. Cochran, well, illegitimate part of the business. Legitimate part of the business you testified that Mr. Cochran was involved in, right?
Mr. Cochran was involved to the extent that he did certain things. With
Like
the business.
what?
He would help locate contracts. He would do online internet searching of federal databases for government contracts that were available for bid from contractors. He would identify those contracts and provide them to Mrs. Cochran, who then would order those contracts or bid on those contracts so they could be awarded those contracts.
And he distanced himself from that point on, from anything to do with the contracts, right?
That is exactly what it appears. But not, that's not all inclusive though. So,
All right. Now, have you, in your thorough investigation of this case, talked to the children of Mr. and Mrs. Cochran?
no.
Well, why not? They were adult by now.
Well, at the time they were children, they had nothing to do with the business, so we weren't.
Would it surprise you if I told you that they observed their parents work on the federal contracts? That is, the father worked on the federal contracts while the mother was reading a newspaper or a book?
No, we know that. We know that exactly.
Well, wait a minute. So, Mr. Cochran is working on those contracts. My client is sitting peacefully reading a book, and you're telling this jury that he had no knowledge of these contracts?
I'm not telling the jury that. I've said that he knew about the contracts that he was led to believe were bid on by their business.
Okay.
We spoke with many witnesses who would see both the Cochrans on the internet looking.
Mr. Hinman, I'm sorry. I'm not interested in any other witnesses. I'm interested in this particular witness as a son or a daughter of the Cochrans. You don't know anything about what happened in the household of the Cochrans when Mr. Cochran was working on those contracts, do you?
We never interviewed the children. We never were in the house while they were working on contracts to observe what he did. So the answer would be no.
Now, this fraud resulted in what the prosecution described here as a lavish lifestyle for the Cochrans. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, let's start with the property that the Cochrans all of a sudden acquired. They had 3 homes, right?
Yes.
So, were those homes acquired simultaneously, or were they purchased during, one after another?
Based on my best memory, because I did not bring any asset schedules up with me, they were purchased at different times.
Okay. And they were not the cheapest of properties, were they?
No, they were not.
What did Mr. Cochran do for a living, sir?
Mr. Cochran's profession or occupation was he was an IT or internet technology specialist. He dealt with networking, setting up IT and networking. That's what his training and certification was, and that's what the business technology management solution would have also done: install wiring, phone lines, computer lines, network things.
What was his job? Where did he derive his income from?
Doing that from 2013 to
Okay.
2017. He also worked for Workforce West Virginia, either as a salaried employee or a subcontractor, doing just that, networking and internet support for them.
Well, how much money was he making a year? Do you know?
Which year?
Well, let's say 2013.
I don't think we pulled his wages back to 2013.
All right, 2017.
That I can give you. His last reported wages, his last reported wages were in 2013, the second quarter of 2013.
So, you really don't know how much money this man was making from any source to give us an estimate as to how much money the family made.
We looked at the Cochran's personal bank accounts
Yeah.
for their business bank accounts,
Well,
and we found sources of income. The focus of our investigation was sources of income from these federal contracts and
Right.
federal government.
and I'm trying to, well, Natalie Cochran was a pharmacist, right?
Yes,
Her income was about 120 grand a year. Wasn't it?
I'm not sure.
All right.
Was,
But his income, as we sit here today before the jury, we still cannot identify. Can we? His individual income.
to a certain point, we can. We
Well-
can. Yes, we can. Can't provide you numbers, but we can.
Huh?
We see what was legitimate income. We see what was not
Okay.
legitimate income.
Was his income, even combined with Natalie Cochran, such that allowed the purchase of 3 real estate properties that would go into thousands of dollars?
Can you
And more specifically,
clarify the 3 properties you're referring to?
property on 219 North Eisenhower Drive, property at 210 Parkwood Drive, property at 433 4H Lake Drive, all subject to subsequent forfeiture.
Yes, the last one, the home on 4H Lake Road, that home was held by them before the Ponzi scheme began. The other 2 properties were purchased with proceeds from the Ponzi schemes during the period of the Ponzi scheme.
And one day, Ms. Cochran sits at home, and her husband walks in and says, "Honey, we just got the property with thousands of dollars." Or she walks in and says, "Honey, we just got the property worth thousands of dollars." And he says what to it? Wouldn't it be surprising to you, Mr. Hinman, that all that lavish lifestyle was sudden and enormous, and any reasonable person such as Mr. Cochran would ask where the money came from? Wouldn't that be the case?
That's a mischaracterization of our investigation. And,
Okay.
and I don't know what your question.
Then the answer is no.
Would I be surprised?
Yeah.
Was that the question?
Well, no. Well, would you be surprised if your wife walked in with a new real estate that she just purchased for X thousands of dollars? Wouldn't you want to question where she got that property? Unless you knew what the source of that income was. Would that be right?
I don't know.
I don't know. Well, all of a sudden, Mr. Cochran can afford a listen to this, 1965 Shelby Cobra replica, an antique car, thousands of dollars. He drives in front of the house and says, "Honey, I just got me a nice little car." Wouldn't that be a question mark for anybody in the family where that money came from?
I don't know. I know where it came from.
Well,
I don't know what people in the family believed.
okay. Well, then we have a Yamaha motorcycle, 2017. 2014 B-Tex dump trailer. Another Yamaha motorcycle. Polaris model. I take it as another motorcycle. Another big trailer. A Yamaha Timberwolf. Honda Rubicon. 2 diamond earrings. One of those earrings was like $14,000, wasn't it? His gift to Natalie.
What was the purchase date of it?
It's like $14,000.
The purchase date?
The earrings, the jewelry.
Purchase date, what year?
I think it was 2018.
19,
2018.
18? And yes, that would be derived from proceeds from the Ponzi scheme as well.
That's right. So he has all that money at his disposal, and he doesn't know where that money comes from, having no identifiable job.
He believed it came from a business called TSG that they ran together, getting federal contracts.
And you believe that? That's your opinion.
The evidence points in that
The evidence?
direction.
All right.
Let's stop at this juncture. I hate to interrupt cross-examination, but we do need a comfort break. We've gone on a little too far, and I want to take a brief recess at this time. We'll break for about